What if I told you that the oldest rule in summer fishing is exactly why you are catching absolute garbage right now? You have heard it a million times from every old-timer. When the water gets hot and the bite gets tough, you have to downsize your lures. Well, I am here to tell you that this piece of advice is a total lie. Today, we are talking about why your tiny summer lures are the exact reason you only catch dinks, while the monsters sit in the shade and watch. I am going to reveal the unexpected truth about how huge bass actually hunt in 90-degree water, and why throwing away your finesse gear might be the best decision you ever make. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never look at your tackle box the same way again in July or August. So let me ask you right now before we dive in. What is the smallest lure you throw in the summer, and how many true giants has it actually caught you? Be honest in the comments. This topic is incredibly important because summer fishing can be absolutely brutal on your patience. You are out there sweating buckets, the sun is beating down on the deck, and the lake feels like a hot tub. Generations of anglers have passed down the exact same stubborn belief. They say hot water makes fish lethargic, so you have to feed them a tiny, easy snack just to get a bite. It is a habit ingrained in us since we were kids fishing with our grandfathers. We automatically reach for the light line and the tiny drop-shot plastics as soon as the thermometer hits 90. And why do we do it year after year? Because it works for catching small fish. We get action, our rod bends, and we trick ourselves into thinking we cracked the code. But the reality is, we are just keeping ourselves busy while the true trophy fish completely ignore us. We are trapped in a cycle of mediocrity because we are simply too afraid to go without a bite for a few hours. It is time to break that habit and understand what is really happening under the surface. You have heard it a million times from every old-timer on the dock. When the summer heat reaches 90 degrees and the water feels like warm bathwater, you have to downsize. You have to tie on the tiniest plastic worm you can find, drop down to 6-pound test line, and finesse those lazy fish into biting. It sounds like gospel, right? But let me ask you a question. While you are busy sweating through your shirt, baking in the sun, and reeling in 5-inch dinks that barely bend your rod, do you ever wonder what the real monsters are doing? I will tell you exactly what they are doing. They are sitting in the shade, laughing at you. They are watching those aggressive little teenagers waste their energy chasing your tiny snack. We have been brainwashed into thinking that hot water means small appetites. It is a myth that has ruined more summer fishing trips than a broken trolling motor. Think about it. You cast out a tiny drop-shot rig. You shake it gently. Suddenly, tap, tap, tap. You set the hook and reel in a fish the size of your hand. You feel like you figured them out, but you actually just fell into the classic summer trap. The big fish are not eating your tiny lure because it is simply not worth their time. We need to completely rethink how we approach summer fishing if we want to catch the ones that actually matter. Let us talk about the cold, hard science of a bass in the middle of July or August. When the water temperatures climb up into the 80s and 90s, a bass does not go on a diet. In fact, their cold-blooded metabolism is running at absolute maximum capacity. They are burning through energy faster than an 8-cylinder engine burns through gas. Now put yourself in the fins of a 10-pound bucket mouth. If you are burning that much energy just existing in hot water, are you going to swim 30 feet to chase down a tiny little minnow? Of course not. That would burn more calories than you would gain. You want a steak dinner. You want one massive meal that will keep you full for the next 2 days. This is where the old-school mentality completely falls apart. The grandpas told us to go small because the fish are lethargic. But they are not lethargic. They are just calculating. They are sitting under a heavy grass mat or tucked deep into a brush pile, waiting for a high-calorie meal to blunder past their face. A 10-inch worm or a massive swim bait represents a meal that justifies the effort of an ambush. When you throw a tiny finesse bait, you are only ringing the dinner bell for the hyperactive juveniles who do not know any better. If you want to stop catching the babies, you have to stop feeding them baby food. It really is that simple. Picture this scenario. It is early morning on your favorite local lake. The mist is just starting to burn off the water, and you can hear the bugs buzzing in the trees. You idle up to a beautiful-looking laydown tree that extends out into deep water. It looks absolutely perfect. You pick up your spinning rod, the one rigged with a tiny little grub on a 1/8-ounce jig head. You make a perfect cast right to the trunk of the tree. The bait sinks, you give it a twitch, and bam, you are hooked up. You wrestle the fish to the boat, and it is a solid 1-pounder. You high-five your buddy and think it is going to be a great day. You throw back in there, catch another 1-pounder, and then another. But deep down in the darkest, thickest part of those branches, a 7-pound giant is watching the whole show. She sees those little fish darting out to eat your grub. She is not intimidated, she just does not care. Your little grub does not move enough water to trigger her lateral line, and it does not represent enough calories to make her move. By throwing that tiny bait, you basically just hired a bunch of little fish to act as a security system for the big one. The commotion of you catching the dinks eventually puts the monster on high alert, and she shuts down completely. You ruined your chance at the fish of a lifetime because you wanted to get a bite quickly. The concept of energy conservation is the ultimate rule of the underwater jungle during the dog days of summer. We often forget that big fish did not get big by being stupid. They survived years of dodging predators, hooks, and changing conditions by being incredibly efficient. Think about a giant bass as a lazy but brilliant hunter. In hot water, oxygen levels can drop, making it even harder for a big fish to sustain long pursuits. They will find a spot with the best available oxygen and shade, and they will hold their ground. When they decide to eat, they want maximum return on investment. If you present a huge jig with a bulky trailer or an oversized crankbait that dives deep and bangs against the rocks, you are offering a substantial meal. You are presenting a big, juicy cheeseburger on a silver platter. That big fish looks at the oversized lure, and instinct takes over. The brain says, if I eat that, I do not have to hunt again until tomorrow. Meanwhile, your buddy in the back of the boat is throwing a tiny Ned rig, slowly dragging it over the same rocks. The big fish sees it, recognizes it as food, but the brain says, that tiny French fry is not worth moving 2 feet for. The little fish, however, have faster metabolisms and need to eat constantly to grow, so they swarm the tiny bait. Size absolutely matters when you want to trigger a feeding response from a giant. Now, I know what some of you are yelling at the screen right now. You are saying, but what about matching the hatch? The baitfish are tiny in the summer. Well, let us break down that classic fishing cliché. Yes, early in the spring, the fry are tiny. But by the time late July and August roll around, those baitfish have been eating and growing for months. The shad are getting bigger, the bluegill are putting on heavy shoulders, and the crawfish are fully grown. Matching the hatch in the middle of summer actually means throwing something with some serious size to it. Look at the shallow water near the boat ramp next time you launch your boat. You will see schools of tiny bait, sure, but look at the size of the adult bluegills hanging around the docks. Those hand-sized panfish are the primary target for a trophy bass. If a big bass has a choice between chasing down 50 tiny minnows or inhaling one giant bluegill, it will choose the bluegill every single time. So when you tie on a 2-inch plastic minnow because you think you are matching the hatch, you are actually just imitating the absolute bottom of the food chain. You are imitating the snack that only the smallest predators care about. To catch the apex predator of your lake, you need to imitate the prey that the apex predator prefers. Upsize your presentation, and you will suddenly find yourself matching the hatch that the big boys are actually looking for. Let us talk about the early morning topwater bite, because this is exactly where the tiny lure mistake happens all the time. You get out on the water before the sun comes up. The lake is like glass. You know the fish are going to be looking up, so you tie on a tiny little popper. It makes a cute little spit on the surface. Pop, pop, pause. You catch a little squeaker bass immediately. It is fun, I will not lie. Topwater blow-ups are always exciting, even from small fish. But if you want to see a true toilet bowl explosion, you need to put down that tiny popper and pick up a massive walking bait or a giant wake bait. I am talking about lures that are 5 to 8 inches long. lures that look like a struggling snake, a giant rat, or a massive injured gizzard shad. When you cast a huge walking bait and get it gliding side to side, pushing a massive wake of water, you are sending a completely different signal into the depths. The heavy thud of the rattle inside a big bait calls fish from 20 yards away. A giant bass holding in 10 feet of water will not come to the surface for a tiny popper, but she will absolutely launch herself like a torpedo to destroy a giant walking bait. Stop settling for the cute little splashes. Tie on a big piece of plastic, walk the dog aggressively, and hold on tight to your rod. There is a major psychological hurdle you have to get over when you start throwing bigger baits in the summer. It is the deep fear of not getting any bites at all. We are conditioned as anglers to measure the success of our day by the total number of fish we catch. If you go out and catch 20 fish, even if they are all 12 inches long, you feel like you had a solid day. You get to tell your friends you caught 20 fish. But let us be brutally honest here. Catching 20 dinks is incredibly easy. It requires very little skill to drop a tiny worm into a school of aggressive little fish. If you want to catch a fish that you will actually want to take a picture of, you have to accept that your bite count is going to go down dramatically. You might go from getting 20 bites a day to getting only 3 bites a day. But those 3 bites will be from fish that will stretch your line and test your drag. You have to reprogram your brain to value quality over quantity. Think of it like hunting for a trophy buck. You do not shoot the first little spike that walks under your tree stand. You wait patiently for the monster. Fishing big lures in the summer is exactly the same game. You are intentionally ignoring the annoying little pecks and pulls of the small fish, waiting for that one aggressive, rod-bending thump from a giant. Let us dive into the murky water situation, because heavy summer thunderstorms can muddy up a lake in a huge hurry. When the water looks like thick chocolate milk, visibility drops to absolute zero. How on earth is a fish going to find your tiny little finesse worm when they cannot even see 1 inch in front of their face? They cannot. They rely entirely on their lateral line to feel the vibration and water displacement of their prey. A small, subtle bait barely moves any water. It is like whispering in a crowded, loud room. Nobody is going to hear you. But a massive, bulky lure with a huge Colorado blade or a giant thumping tail is like yelling through a megaphone. It creates a shockwave in the water that a big bass can track from a long distance. Imagine throwing a giant spinnerbait with a blade the size of a silver dollar through that muddy water. It thumps so hard you can feel it all the way down to the handle of your rod. That aggressive vibration is the only way a fish is going to find your bait. If you stick to your tiny summer lures in dirty water, you are essentially fishing with invisible bait. Upsize your plastics, use the biggest blades you can find, and choose solid dark colors that create a thick silhouette. Make it easy for the fish to find your lure, and make it big enough that they cannot resist attacking it. If you love flipping heavy cover in the middle of a hot summer day, you already know that the thickest grass mats and lily pads offer the best shade and the coolest water. The biggest fish bury themselves deep inside this dense jungle. Now, imagine trying to punch through a thick canopy of vegetation with a tiny, lightweight bait. It gets hung up, it will not penetrate, and even if it does manage to squeeze through, it gets completely lost in the underwater forest. You need serious weight, and you need bulk. You need a massive punching rig with a 1 ounce or even a 2 ounce tungsten weight paired with a large, bulky creature bait. When that heavy rig crashes through the ceiling of the grass mat, it creates an instant reaction strike. The lure drops like a rock right past the nose of a resting giant. It startles them, and their instinct is to instantly flare their gills and inhale whatever just invaded their living room. A tiny bait simply cannot trigger this aggressive reaction. It lacks the speed, the heavy weight, and the aggressive profile needed to wake up a big fish buried in the weeds. Do not be afraid to throw something that looks completely obnoxious. When you are flipping heavy cover, there is no such thing as too big or too loud. You are literally breaking into their house, so you might as well kick the front door down. What about the deep water bite? In the sweltering heat of the summer, many lakes develop a strong thermocline. This is a layer of water where the temperature changes rapidly, and it often dictates exactly where the fish will hold. If you find the deep structure where the big bass are schooling right on that thermocline edge, you have hit the absolute jackpot. But how do you fish for them? The old-timer advice is to drop down a tiny little spoon or a finesse drop-shot rig. Sure, you will catch fish. You will pull up spotted bass and small largemouth all day long, but the matriarch of the school is sitting right on the bottom, quietly watching the feeding frenzy above her. To get her attention, you need to bomb a massive, deep-diving crankbait or a 10-inch ribbon-tail worm straight into the school. When a giant crankbait grinds into the rocky bottom in 20 feet of water, deflecting off heavy stumps and kicking up huge clouds of mud, it looks exactly like a large, panicked baitfish trying to escape. That frantic, high-energy presentation from a large-profile lure is what triggers the biggest fish in the deep school. The smaller fish might just follow it, but the giant will actually try to kill it. Dragging a huge worm slowly through that same deep brush pile offers a completely different, but equally effective, large meal. Leave the tiny drop shot in the rod locker and go massive in the deep water. Summer night fishing is an entirely different beast, and it is another prime situation where tiny lures will completely ruin your chances. When the blazing sun goes down and the moon comes up, the big fish leave their deep water sanctuaries and cruise the shallows looking for an easy meal. Vision is heavily restricted, even on a bright night. Bass rely almost entirely on the silhouette of the bait against the surface of the water and the loud sound it makes. This is the time to throw the biggest, blackest, loudest topwater baits you own. A huge jitterbug, a massive buzzbait, or a big, noisy crawler bait. The plop, plop, plop sound echoing across a silent, pitch-black lake is pure magic. If you try to fish a tiny, subtle lure at night, you are just wasting your precious time. The fish will simply swim right past it because they do not even know it is there. I have seen guys throw small, curly tail grubs at night, wondering why they only catch tiny panfish. Meanwhile, the guy throwing a giant black spinnerbait with a thumping single Colorado blade is hauling in giants. Night fishing is all about making a major statement. You want your lure to create a large, dark profile that stands out starkly against the moonlight. A big lure provides a much easier target for a night-feeding bass to track and attack in the dark. Let us talk about the wind. Summer fishing can be brutally hot and still, but when a summer breeze kicks up and puts a heavy chop on the water, everything changes instantly. The wind breaks up the surface, reducing light penetration and giving the big fish a strong sense of security. It also pushes huge schools of baitfish against wind-blown points and shorelines. This is exactly when the feed bag turns on. The biggest mistake you can make when the wind is blowing is trying to cast a tiny, weightless plastic. Not only is it completely impossible to cast accurately into a stiff breeze, but it also gets completely lost in the heavy turbulence of the waves. When the wind is howling, you need a lure with serious drawing power. A large, heavy spinnerbait or a full-size chatterbait is absolutely perfect for this. The heavy weight allows you to cut right through the wind and make long casts. The big blades flash in the reduced light, and the heavy vibration calls fish out of the choppy, chaotic water. I love throwing a heavy chatterbait right against a wind-blown rocky point. The aggressive action matches the chaotic energy of the wind and the crashing waves. The small fish might get tossed around in the current, but the big fish are actively hunting in the turmoil. Give them a target they can actually find in all that chaos. We absolutely have to address the reality of fishing on heavily pressured lakes. During the long summer months, every public lake is swarming with loud jet skis, pontoon boats, and hundreds of other fishermen. The fish are highly stressed, nervous, and they have seen every standard fishing lure in the catalogue 1,000 times. They have seen a million small green pumpkin worms. They know exactly what a tiny Ned rig looks like. When a fish is highly pressured, showing them the exact same tiny lure that everyone else is throwing is a guaranteed recipe for a skunking. Sometimes, The best way to beat extreme fishing pressure is to give them something completely out of the ordinary. Show them a lure so large and intrusive that they bite it simply out of anger or territorial defense. A massive glide bait that slowly swims back and forth in a lazy S pattern can absolutely mesmerize a pressured fish. They have never seen anything like it. It looks like a huge, vulnerable meal that has wandered into the wrong neighborhood. I have watched giant bass follow a big glide bait all the way to the side of the boat, completely ignoring the engine noise and the pressure, purely out of curiosity and raw aggression. When finesse tactics fail because the fish are too educated, shock them with huge size. Break the rules and show them something they simply cannot ignore. There is a very important distinction to make about the speed of your retrieve in the summer heat. A lot of anglers think that because the water is warm and the fish are active, they need to reel their lures as fast as humanly possible. While a blindingly fast retrieve can sometimes trigger reaction strikes, it often results in missed bites from smaller fish that simply cannot keep up. When you upsize your lure, you actually want to slow down your presentation. Think about it for a second. A giant bluegill or a large gizzard shad does not zip around like a hyperactive little minnow. They move with steady purpose, but they are not constantly sprinting. When you throw a big swim jig or a large swim bait, a slow, steady retrieve is incredibly realistic. It gives the big bass plenty of time to track the bait, size it up, and make a calculated decision to strike. Watching a huge swim bait slowly creeping along the bottom, just barely moving its tail, is completely irresistible to a big fish. It looks exactly like an easy, high-calorie meal that is not going to put up a fight. So, put down the high-speed reel, upsize your lure, and just consciously slow down. Let the massive size and the built-in action of the bait do all the heavy lifting for you. One of the most exciting sights in summer fishing is a large school of bass busting bait on the surface. The water erupts, fish are jumping, and bait fish are flying everywhere in a panic. Your first instinct is to grab a rod with a tiny spoon or a small jerkbait and throw it right into the middle of the boiling water. And yes, if you do that, you will catch fish almost instantly. But pay very close attention to what you are actually catching. The fish breaking the surface, doing all the loud splashing, are almost always the smaller, aggressive schooling bass. The 2- and 3-pounders are doing all the hard work, rounding up the bait and stunning them. So where are the actual monsters? They are sitting 10 feet below the chaos, patiently waiting for the dead and injured baitfish to slowly flutter down to the bottom. They are lazy, remember? They let the young kids do all the work. If you want to catch the giant sitting under the school, you need to completely ignore the surface action. Take a heavy flutter spoon or a large, heavily weighted swim bait, cast it well beyond the school, and let it sink straight down through the active fish. Let it flutter all the way to the bottom. You are imitating the largest, most injured piece of bait that fell out of the feeding frenzy. That is exactly how you pull a 10-pounder out from underneath a school of small fish. Now, if you are going to fully commit to throwing bigger baits this summer, we have to talk about your equipment. You cannot tie a massive 1-ounce jig or a heavy 6-inch swim bait onto a medium-light spinning rod with 8-pound test line. That is a guaranteed recipe for total heartbreak. If a giant actually decides to eat your oversized lure, you will not have the backbone to drive a thick-gauge hook into its hard jaw, and the fish will snap your light line in seconds. Upgrading your lure size means you absolutely must upgrade your gear. You need heavy power rods, fast-action tips, and incredibly strong line. We are talking about 60-pound braided line or 20-pound fluorocarbon. You need a bait casting reel with a heavy drag system that can stop a freight train in its tracks. Throwing big baits is a heavy-duty game. When that massive bite finally comes, you are going to be so thankful you have the right tools for the job. Do not let your flimsy equipment be the weak link. The transition to big baits is as much about having the right tackle as it is about having the right mindset. When you set the hook with a heavy rod and thick braided line, you are taking complete control of the fight. You are not finessing the fish, you are overpowering it. Let us talk about the strike itself, because it feels completely different when a giant fish eats a massive lure compared to a dink pecking at a tiny worm. When you are fishing a small finesse bait, you feel a series of rapid, annoying taps. Tap, tap, tap. That is a small fish grabbing the tail of the worm and trying to swim away with it. You have to guess when the hook is actually inside its mouth before you set it. But when you are fishing a large, bulky bait, there is absolutely no tapping. There is no guessing game. When a big bass decides to eat a large lure, they do not nibble. They flare their massive gills and create a huge vacuum that inhales the bait entirely. You will feel one single, remarkably heavy thump, thump, and then your line will just feel incredibly heavy, like you snagged a moving wet towel. That is the exact moment you reel down, sweep the rod hard, and drive the hook home. The difference in the bite is completely staggering. That single, solid thump is the drug that big bass hunters are completely addicted to. Once you feel that heavy thud on a big bait, you will never want to go back to feeling those annoying little taps from a bluegill or a 12-inch bass again. As we push through the dog days of late summer, something truly magical starts to happen on the water. The days get just a little bit shorter, the nights get just a little bit cooler, and the fish start sensing that fall is rapidly approaching. This is when the big bait pattern goes from being good to being absolutely legendary. The big fish know that lean times are coming, and they deeply need to pack on as much weight as possible before winter sets in. They become total eating machines, and they are exclusively looking for the absolute biggest meals they can find. If you have spent the entire summer training yourself to throw big baits and ignore the small bites, you are perfectly positioned for the fall transition. You already have the right heavy rods tied on, you already know the big fish spots, and your confidence in big lures is running high. While the other guys are still trying to eke out a few pathetic bites on tiny plastics, you are aggressively intercepting the biggest fish in the lake as they move shallow to gorge on giant gizzard shad and huge bluegills. The big bait mentality is not just a hot summer strategy, it is an investment in the absolute best fishing season of the entire year. I want to challenge you on your very next trip to the lake. I know it is incredibly tempting to start the day with what feels safe. It is so easy to pick up that spinning rod and catch a quick limit of little fish just to avoid a skunk. But I challenge you to leave the finesse rods in the truck. Just lock them up in the cab and do not even bring them in the boat. Tie on a massive jig, a giant topwater, or a huge swim bait, and fully commit to throwing it for at least 4 hours. It is going to feel strange at first. You will cast for an hour without a bite, and you will start severely doubting yourself. You will hear the guy in the next boat catching little fish, and the temptation to downsize will be overwhelming. But fight that urge. Stay completely focused on the deep brush piles, the thick grass mats, and the wind-blown points. Keep visualizing that giant fish sitting in the dark shadows, waiting for your bait. It only takes one single cast to completely change your perspective on fishing forever. When that 8-pounder finally explodes on your bait and you wrestle it into the net, all those hours of casting without a bite will instantly vanish from your memory. You will finally understand why the big fish ignore the tiny stuff. The ultimate truth about summer fishing is that you dictate the quality of your catch by the choices you make before you ever cast a line. Tiny summer lures definitely have their place. If you are taking a young kid fishing, or you just want to bend a rod on anything that swims, then by all means throw a tiny worm and have a blast catching dinks. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. But if you are tired of sweating all day for mediocre fish, if you are wondering why the giants always seem to elude you in August, it is time to look at the end of your line. The monsters are there. They are eating. They are just not eating what you are throwing. By breaking the old-school rules and upsizing your lures in the hottest part of the year, you are stepping out of the kiddie pool and entering the big leagues. You are finally speaking the language of an apex predator. It takes immense patience, it takes stubborn discipline, and it takes the right heavy gear. But the reward is a fish that you will remember for the rest of your life. So step out of your comfort zone, tie on something terrifyingly large, and go show those monsters exactly what they have been waiting for. Let us quickly recap what we covered today. We completely shattered the ancient myth that hot water means you need to throw tiny lures. We talked about how big fish need big calories to fuel their massive summer metabolisms, and exactly why they will ignore a tiny meal but destroy a giant one just to conserve energy. The biggest turning point here is the realization that matching the hatch in late summer actually means imitating huge bluegills and giant shad, not tiny fry. This is a total plot twist for most guys out there who think finesse is the only way to survive the brutal summer heat. Upsizing your baits, slowing down your retrieve, and accepting fewer bites will absolutely transform your approach and put the biggest fish of the season in your boat. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If you want to start catching monsters instead of dinks, hit that subscribe button right now. Do not forget to drop a like on the video. It really helps the channel out. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Are you going to commit to throwing big baits on your next summer trip, or are you too scared to leave the tiny lures at home? Let us argue about it down there.